Chinese web censor learned the value of free speech and democracy and then defected to America. In our exclusive three-part interview, he exposes the inside story of the CCP's complex system of internet censorship and how the Communist Party has been infiltrating the free world. Part 1 takes us behind the scenes at TikTok.
网络审查是非常大的权利。
Liu Lipeng finally has the freedom to talk to our reporters about the CCP's internet censorship based on his personal experiences as a web censor. Liu has been working in internet censorship, what he calls a dirty industry, for over a decade. He used to work as a web censor for the Chinese microblogging site Sina Weibo, and later became the head of the censorship department at Le.com, one of the largest online video companies in China. Both companies are privately owned. Liu estimates China's private sector employs about 1 to 2 million web censors, almost as many as their Communist Party web commentators, commonly known as the 50 Cent Army. Web censors and the 50 Cent Army both work to suppress free speech. They delete posts that the authorities don't want people to see and spread fake or distorted news online. The 50 Cent Army is paid by the regime. However, the CCP doesn't want to pay to censor content from private internet companies. So to abide by the party's censorship regulations, all private internet companies have to hire their own web censors, which can amount to a large number. Liu says TikTok has at least 10,000 web censors, some of whom work at the company's Tianjin branch. TikTok is a video-sharing social networking service and very popular in the US and Europe. It is owned by Chinese company ByteDance. Liu described his experience visiting that branch for an interview as entering into a drug lord's lair. Everything there seemed hidden, and he was strictly forbidden from looking around while in the building. He was also kept away from the main working areas. Later, he discovered something TikTok has tried to hide.
TikTok 在那里做审核。
I later realized TikTok was censoring American people's speech there. This huge number of Chinese web censors have been brainwashed by the CCP's propaganda for decades, and many of them are CCP members. These people living in fear of the CCP were there to censor American people's speech.
Liu explains TikTok has to obey CCP rules, even if it wants to operate in overseas markets. But it is impossible to apply the same level of censorship outside China, so the company has to promise the party it will do anything to stop Chinese people from using TikTok. He told us about who is not allowed to use TikTok.
华人一概不许入内。
The Chinese are not allowed to access TikTok. If you use a made-in-China cell phone, or if you have a Chinese SIM card, or if you are personally in China, any of these conditions will keep you out of TikTok.
Liu says the only reason TikTok has to withdraw from the Hong Kong market is that it overlaps with Douyin, the Chinese version of TikTok, which is only allowed to be used by Chinese people. Unlike other companies like Facebook or Google, TikTok did not mention anything about the national security law when they announced the withdrawal. Reporting by Xi Wenhui, NTD News.
A Chinese web censor learned the value of free speech and democracy and then defected to America. In our exclusive three-part interview, he exposes the inside story of the CCP's complex system of internet censorship and how the Communist Party has been infiltrating the free world. Part 2 moves on to Hong Kong. For years, Liu Lipeng worked as a web censor for Weibo, a Twitter-like Chinese social media app. He describes the work environment as a censorship factory, with lots of people working in a large warehouse-like building. Each worker is provided with only a laptop and a desk, with all workstations packed densely together. Everyone stares only at his or her screen. Nobody talks. And the only sound that can be heard is the relentless clicking of computer mice.
就现在都一人一台笔记本。
One laptop, one person in each desk, row after row after row of desks. Everybody has the same screen with the same operator interface. Isn't it a factory?
这不就是一个工厂吗？
Liu says almost all the senior positions are held by people in Beijing, but he explained that the censorship factories are also set up in other cities. Altogether, they employ 1 to 2 million web censor workers all over China. That's nearly as many workers as in the Chinese Communist Party's or CCP's 50 Cent Army. Liu noted the Cyberspace Administration of China set goals for internet celebrities to help suppress the freedom of speech online.
反正就是
In any case, the goal is to silence the Chinese people, silence opinion leaders. What they want is for people not to go against the CCP, not stand in their way, not know the truth.
Liu said Weibo's censorship backend would classify users based on their race, geographical location, social status, and influence, among other factors. That information was then used to determine what to do with each user's posts. Liu also confirmed that as early as 2011, the Hong Kong issue was gaining major traction online. Even back at that time, social media accounts were getting blocked and posts were being deleted.
Every time Hong Kong's July 1st Grand Parade happens, Weibo will automatically kill any posts from any Hong Kong IP address if they include pictures.
But Liu secretly unlocked some accounts. User Jenny Hose was one of them. Liu says reading Jenny's posts helped him realize how the CCP stands against freedom and how a clear divide exists between the Chinese regime and other free countries. Liu believes Chinese authorities have been planning a scheme to suppress Hong Kong for a long time.
I think the national security law on Hong Kong has been part of the CCP's plan for years. Now they're almost there. The regime must be thinking that they've finally gotten Hong Kong under control.
Liu says he doubts the CCP has the guts for an armed war, but that will definitely enforce strict censorship in Hong Kong.
The CCP relies on censorship to enslave people, deprive them of their freedom, and even their desire for freedom.
Liu said he's tried to help others whenever possible. At one point, he disclosed a list of all sensitive search terms he knows of. That way, people know what words to avoid using in their posts so they won't get taken down. But he explained the sensitive word bank is far too large for him to know all of the censored terms. Liu said his talks with Jenny have always inspired him and that he purposely wore a pro-Hong Kong t-shirt for his interview. He says that reminds him of Jenny too. Unfortunately, Jenny's account was later blocked again and the two lost contact. Liu says he has a message for Hong Kongers amid their fight for freedom and is hoping to use our platform to reach them.
Please keep fighting the good fight, like you inspired me years ago. As long as you keep going, you will inspire more people. People from all corners of the world will notice your efforts. As long as you keep fighting back against the CCP, people will continue to stand up for the cause, and help will always come.
After learning the value of free speech and democracy, a former Chinese web censor has left the past behind and defected to America. In our exclusive three-part interview, he exposes the inside story of the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP's, complex system of internet censorship and how the regime has been infiltrating the free world. In part 3, we'll move on to the CCP's persecution of the spiritual practice Falun Gong. Liu Lipeng worked for Weibo, a Twitter-like Chinese social media app, as a web censor for years. His experience gives a unique understanding why the Chinese people have such a deep-rooted fear of the regime's speech control. Web censors know firsthand how Chinese police use censorship records to arrest and harass people simply for making comments the CCP doesn't approve of. Liu told us that his fellow co-workers don't talk to each other much, not even during lunch breaks.
CCP censorship reminds you how terrifying talking can be. It makes you worry about the consequence of your words and makes you feel the fear that CCP constantly trains you to experience.
In China, a person must go through strict ID verification in order to upload content online or to video sharing platforms. The applicant is required to take photos of him or herself while holding up both sides of his or her state-issued ID. Liu likened it to mugshots taken of criminals. He says the purpose is to make it easy for local police to find you if you criticize the regime online. He explained that in his eyes, China has become like what George Orwell described in his novels Animal Farm or 1984, where a totalitarian state seeks to control every facet of people's lives. He added that living under that kind of control can even distort Chinese people's personalities.
It's like the double thinking George Orwell talked about. People can embrace disruptive behavior out of fear. Even though you don't agree with something, what you say or do could be the opposite.
Liu says the CCP censorship and the threats that accompany the censorship have even caused people to self-censor. In order to stay safe and protect themselves and their families, people gradually began to censor themselves. And as time went by, they got used to that way of living. Their ability to look for and recognize the truth became blurred, and they became indifferent to it.
The Chinese Communist Party doesn't care whether you agree with it. What they want is for you to fear the barrel of their guns.
Liu explained that there are two sensitive phrases the CCP fears most: Tiananmen Square protests and Falun Gong. He told us using them online is absolutely forbidden. Tiananmen Square protest refers to the 1989 democratic movement in Beijing inside Tiananmen Square in the center of Beijing. Chinese soldiers opened fire on unarmed students and citizens and even ran over some of them with tanks. It's estimated that thousands of people were killed, though Chinese Communist regime claims no one was killed. The other sensitive phrase refers to Falun Gong, a traditional Chinese spiritual discipline practiced by tens of millions of people around the world. The regime has been persecuting the practice for over 2 decades and has used its state-controlled media to spread propaganda to defame it. As a result, people who practice Falun Gong have used what limited means were available to combat the disinformation campaign, even writing the practice's main principles of truth, compassion, and tolerance on banknotes.
The persecution of Falun Gong is still going on in China. It's still happening right now. In China, you can find Falun Gong's message on banknotes. Falun Gong is the #1 sensitive phrase in China. Even mentioning the words Falun Gong has consequences. If you do so online, your account will be deleted immediately.
Falun Gong's founding principles of truth, compassion, and tolerance are recognized as universal values by the free world, but not the CCP's China.
I think there is a criterion, a bottom line, to measure the CCP's attitude towards freedom. That is, whether practicing Falun Gong is allowed.
Given his 10 years' worth of experience in web censorship and the sharp contrast between the free world and China, our reporter asked Liu if he had any advice for China's current web censors. After silently considering his answer for some time, he had said he'd like to remind the web censors not to sacrifice their human values for a little personal gain. He added that he wants them to understand that freedom is the foundation of all good lives.
You are young people. What you see, you use, you like, are all products from the free world. If you destroy the free world, where else are you going to go?
Web censorship is still tightening in China, and the regime is working to project it to other countries too. Meanwhile, the West is imposing sanctions to counter Chinese control through apps and the web. Reporting by Wang Ziyi.